The city, a sprawling beast of a metropolis, usually throbbed with 1,000 heartbeats. But out here, in the neglected suburban fringe, it merely hummed a dizzy tune. Tonight, even that hum was muffled by a persistent, chilling drizzle that slicked the asphalt and painted the streetlights in hazy, sepia rings. Nam, 19, and a first-year student, cursed under his breath. His convenience store shift had stretched, leaving him to rush out at 23:50. He pulled his thin jacket tighter, the damp air seeping to his bones, breaking into a jog. The bus stop ahead was a forlorn island of dimness, its single yellow bulb flickering with an almost apologetic glow. He knew by this hour regular lines would have retreated, leaving him a long, cold walk to his dorm. A sigh escaped him, a visible vapor puff in the cool night. Then, an unexpected ripple. Muted yellow headlamps pierced the gloom, growing larger, cutting through the fine rain curtain. A bus.
Nam squinted, a bewildered hope igniting. It was old, its paint faded olive green. As it drew near her, the dull glow from its interior seemed less inviting, more like a trapped, sickly light. He edged closer to the curb, heart quickening with relief and apprehension. The bus hissed to a stop, air brakes releasing a sigh of metal and steam. Above the windshield, the destination sign, an old-fashioned sprawl, was illuminated by the same anemic yellow light. Characters, hand-painted and faded, swam into focus. Tuyến không, giờ khởi hành, 000. Route 0, departure time, midnight. Nam frowned. He'd never seen a Route 0. It felt wrong, a number that shouldn't exist. A prickle of unease crawled up his spine, but the biting cold and urgent desire for warmth, for home, quickly overrode it. Recklessness, a trait he sometimes regretted, nudged him forward. He pulled open the folding doors, which glided open with an unnerving, silent ease.
A wave of stale, gold air, carrying a faint, musty scent, washed over him. The interior was bathed in a deeper twilight than outside. Overhead lights were almost non-existent, mere pinpricks of weak orange. A shiver, unrelated to the rain, ran down Nam's back. He stepped inside, the rubber mat feeling oddly spongy, muted. The driver, a figure almost entirely obscured by shadow, didn't turn. Nam fumbled for his student's ID, but there was no card reader, no fare box, no modern amenities. His gaze drifted past the driver to the handful of passengers scattered sparsely. They sat utterly still, like forgotten mannequins. No rustle of clothes, no casual glance up, just absolute, unnerving silence. Their forms were indistinct in the gloom, cloaked in worn, old-fashioned garments, muted shades of gray and brown. Nam picked a seat near the middle, not too close to the silent driver, not too close to the unmoving figures.
The silence pressed in, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant patter of rain against the windows. As he settled into the surprisingly hard seat, a voice, raspy and deep, scraped through the quiet. It emanated from the driver, who hadn't moved. "Once on, you can't get off midway." The words were flat, devoid of inflection, yet carried a chilling finality. Nam jumped, a gasp catching in his throat. He clutched his backpack straps, knuckles white. He tried to rationalize it, a strict safety rule, a grumpy driver. He swallowed, trying to calm his racing pulse, offering a mumbled, unheard, "okay." The bus shuddered, a low hum rising from its ancient engine, then began to move. Slowly at first, then gaining a peculiar, almost unnatural momentum. Nam leaned back, trying to appear nonchalant, but his eyes were drawn compulsively to the window. The city lights, blurred by rain, began to streak past. But something was terribly wrong. The familiar streetscape outside started to warp, distorting in ways that defied physics.
Buildings elongated, stretching like taffy, then compressing, folding in on themselves, only to snap back into impossibly tall, crooked structures. Streetlights bent like question marks, their halos bleeding into the blackness. It was like watching the world through a funhouse mirror or a nightmare. His breath hitched. He tore his gaze away, rubbing his eyes, trying to make sense of the impossible. When he looked again, the distortion was still there, subtle but undeniable. A cold, creeping dread tightened its grip. This wasn't just an old bus. This wasn't just a strange route. He forced himself to look away from the unsettling world outside, to focus on anything normal inside. That's when he noticed them, the passengers. They hadn't moved, but now, in the faint, flickering light, he saw them with chilling clarity. Their clothes were old and faded. And their faces, that's where the true horror resided. Each one, every still, silent figure, lacked eyes. Where their eyes should have been, there were only vacant, sunken hollows, deep pools of impenetrable shadow. Not scars, not bandages, but simply nothing. Empty, dark sockets, like orifices leading into an abyss. Nam's blood ran cold. A whimper died in his throat. His grip on his backpack tightened to a painful degree. He wanted to scream, to run, to demand to be let off, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed, caught in a tableau of unimaginable terror. Then, in a terrifying, synchronized movement that defied their very lack of sight, every single one of those eyeless passengers slowly, silently turned their heads, all at once, all facing him. The empty black pits where their eyes should have been seemed to bore into his very soul. Icy sweat broke over Nam's forehead, tracing paths down his temples. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming silence. He squeezed his eyes shut, then forced them open. The silent, eyeless stares persisted. A dry, rasping sound broke the quiet, not from the driver, but from the passenger closest to him, a frail-looking woman in a faded gray dress. Her head was still angled directly at him, her eyeless sockets seemingly fixed on his trembling form. Her voice was a whisper, devoid of emotion, like leaves rustling in a forgotten cemetery. Cậu không nên lên tuyến này. You shouldn't have boarded this route. Nam's blood ran colder, if that were possible. The words, whispered like a death knell, echoed in the suffocating silence. He flinched away from the eyeless woman, pressing himself further into the hard seat, trying to become a feeling presence. He could almost taste the fear, sharp and metallic on his tongue. Was he dreaming? Was this some elaborate, cruel prank? No, the chilling reality of the warped city outside, the impossible, sightless stairs, was too vivid, too visceral to be anything but true. He wanted to close his eyes, to wish it all away, but he was morbidly compelled to keep them open, locked in this silent, terrifying confrontation. Just as the edge of true hysteria began to fray his composure, a new voice cut through the pervasive dread. It was different, distinct, not the driver's rasp, nor the lifeless whisper of the eyeless passenger.
This voice was calm, resonant, the unmistakably human. Ngồi yên, đừng nhìn ra ngoài cửa sổ nữa. Sit still, don't look out the window anymore. Nam's head snapped towards the source. It came from the very back of the bus, shrouded in the deepest shadows. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw him. A man, perhaps in his late 30s, sat hunched against the back window. He wore clothes that, while simple, looked perfectly ordinary: a dark jacket, jeans. And crucially, miraculously, he had a face, a normal face, with two clear, discerning eyes that even in the dim light seemed to hold an uncommon depth, a weary understanding. He was the only one, the only one. The man raised a hand, a subtle gesture for Nam to remain silent, to be still. There was no menace in his expression, only a profound, almost sorrowful weariness. His presence, though distant, was a lifeline in the terrifying sea of the unknown. Nam, desperate for any anchor, any shred of normalcy, clung to the instruction. He forced himself to avert his gaze from the eyeless throng, though he could still feel their phantom stares burning into his back. He didn't look out the window either, the twisted cityscape now a memory he wished he could erase. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a strained whisper, barely audible even to himself. Chuyện gì đang xảy ra? What is happening? The question was loaded with 1,000 unspoken fears, a desperate plea for comprehension in a world suddenly stripped of all logic. The man at the back shifted slightly, leaning forward as if to bridge the gap between them, though he remained in his seat. His voice was low, careful, like someone sharing a fragile secret. Đây là tuyến xe dành cho những người đã không còn thuộc về thế giới sống.
This is a route for those who no longer belong to the living world. The words were delivered without melodrama, a simple, chilling statement of fact. Nhưng thỉnh thoảng, có người sống vô tình thấy được và bước lên. But sometimes, a living person accidentally sees it and gets on. Nam felt a cold dread seep deeper into his bones. His worst fears were confirmed, yet the stark reality was far more terrifying than any nightmare. Như tôi, he breathed, the realization dawning with a sickening lurch. Like me? A slow, deliberate nod from the man. Đúng? Yes. The confirmation was a death sentence. Nam felt a tremor run through his entire body, a profound, bone-deep chill. He was on a ghost bus, a phantom vehicle ferrying the dead, and he, somehow, was not. He, a student rushing home from a late shift, had stumbled into a realm where the living were not meant to tread. His mind raced, a chaotic blur of questions, fears, and desperate pleas. How? Why him? What did it mean?
His voice was a bare tremor. Tôi phải làm sao? What should I do? It was a plea for guidance, for survival, addressed to the one normal face in this waking horror. The man in the back held Nam's gaze, his eyes so starkly alive, conveying a deep, empathetic sorrow. He paused, as if weighing heavy words before finally speaking. His voice, though quiet, was imbued with an urgent gravity that made Nam's blood run cold again. Nếu xe đến bên cuối, cậu sẽ không bao giờ rời khỏi xe nữa. If the bus reaches the final stop, you will never leave this bus again. The implication hung in the air, cold and definitive, like a freshly dug grave. Nam understood. The final stop wasn't merely a destination. It was an eternal prison, a point of no return. And he was currently on the express route there. The man's words, a chilling pronouncement of his fate, echoed in the hollow space of the bus,
crushing any lingering fragment of hope Nam had desperately clung to. If the bus reaches the final stop, you will never leave this bus again. It was a simple sentence, yet it painted a vivid, horrifying picture of an eternal journey with these silent, eyeless passengers forever trapped between worlds. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him breathless, dizzy. A cold, clammy sweat now coated his entire body, despite the surprisingly chill air within the bus. He swallowed hard, his throat dry and constricted. His eyes darted nervously between the man at the back, his only apparent ally, and the unmoving figures slumped in their seats, their dark eye sockets a constant, silent accusation. He was a trespasser, an anomaly, a living breath among the eternally still. He had to get off. He had to. But how? The bus was speeding now, the low hum of its engine growing into a steady, hypnotic drone.
And the driver's earlier warning, "Once on, you can't get off midway," replayed in his mind like a broken record, mocking his desperation. He risked a quick glance at the windows, and despite the earlier warning from the man, a morbid curiosity, mixed with sheer terror, compelled him. What he saw outside banished any lingering doubt about the nature of this journey. The twisted cityscape was gone, replaced by an abyssal darkness, a vast, featureless void that stretched endlessly in all directions. There were no stars, no moon, no distant city lights, just an oppressive, lightless expanse that seemed to consume everything. The bus, with its sickly yellow glow, was a lone, fragile bubble traversing an infinite emptiness. Then, faint at first, he saw them. Shapes, indistinct and spectral, began to appear in the blackness. They drifted, aimlessly, like forgotten leaves caught in an unseen current, swirling slowly, sometimes bumping gently against the side of the bus.
As the bus continued its relentless trajectory, these forms became clearer, more numerous. They were vaguely human-shaped, wispy and translucent, their bodies seemingly made of mist and shadow. A wave of nausea washed over Nam. He pressed his hand against the cold glass, feeling a strange vibration, a faint tremor that was not from the bus's engine. He focused on one figure, closer than the others, and his blood froze. It was a person, undeniably. Or what used to be a person. Their clothes were tattered remnants, their hair long and straggly, obscuring a face that seemed to scream silently. Their limbs, elongated and ethereal, drifted in the void. They looked utterly lost, eternally suspended. Suddenly, with a sickening thud that vibrated through the entire bus frame, a shadowy figure slammed against the window right beside Nam. It was a woman, her form more defined than the others, her face a mask of silent agony pressed against the glass.
Her mouth was open in a soundless shriek. Her spectral hands clawing at the window, desperately trying to get in. Her eyes, or where eyes should have been, were the same dark, empty hollows as the passengers inside. Nam recoiled, a choked cry escaping his lips, scrambling away from the window, his back hitting the seat opposite with a dull thud. The terrifying image of the screaming, eyeless figure outside was seared into his mind. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to erase it, but it was useless. The memory posed behind his eyelids, a horrifying testament to the reality he was now trapped in. He felt utterly exposed, utterly vulnerable. Đừng nhìn những kẻ bên ngoài, họ là hành khách cũ, không xuống được nữa. The voice of the man from the back was calm, yet carried a weary sorrow that pierced the fear. Don't look at those outside. They are old passengers who couldn't get off anymore. Nam opened his eyes trembling and met the man's steady gaze.
The man's face,
though edged with a deep sadness, held a strange, resolute strength. He was a survivor, Nam realized, or at least someone who understood this horrifying reality better than anyone else. He was the only one who could possibly help. Nam needed to trust him completely. His life, or whatever was left of it, depended on it. He tore his gaze away from the window, away from the endless, terrifying void, away from the desperate, silent screams outside. He focused all his attention on the man, a desperate plea for guidance in his eyes. The bus continued its relentless journey through the darkness, an iron coffin hurtling towards an unknown, terrifying destination. Nam swallowed hard, the taste of fear still metallic on his tongue. He dared not look out the window again. The image of the silent, screaming face pressed against the glass burned into his mind like a brand. His entire body trembled, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that threatened to shake him apart.
The cold sweat persisted, making his clothes cling unpleasantly to his skin. He felt a profound disorientation, a complete severance from the world he knew just minutes ago. This was not a dream. This was a horrifying, inescapable reality. He kept his gaze fixed on the man at the back of the bus, clinging to his normal face as a desperate beacon in the encroaching madness. The other passengers remained still, their eyeless heads still vaguely oriented towards him, a chilling and constant reminder of his precarious situation. The low drone of the bus engine, combined with the unsettling quiet within, was beginning to have a hypnotic effect, a slow descent into despair. But the man's words, "They are old passengers who couldn't get off anymore," spurred a fresh surge of terror, and with it, a sliver of desperate determination. He would not become one of them.
The man slowly pushed himself up from his seat, his movements deliberate and unhurried, as if he had performed this action countless times before. He walked with a slight limp, his gaze never leaving Nam. As he approached, the dim light got his features, revealing subtle lines of exhaustion around his eyes and a deep-seated melancholy that seemed to be a permanent fixture. He was not old, perhaps early 30s, but his eyes held the weary wisdom of someone who had seen too much. Nam watched his approach, every muscle in his body tense, ready to react, though he didn't know what he would do. The man stopped beside Nam's seat, bending down slightly, his voice a low, urgent whisper meant only for Nam's ears. Khi xe giảm tốc, cửa sẽ mở trong 3 giây, chúng ta nhảy xuống. When the bus slows down, the doors will open for 3 seconds, we jump. The words were a sudden, electric shock, jolting Nam from his terrified stupor. A way out, a chance, but only 3 seconds.
Nam's breath hitched. Jump from a moving bus? Into that terrifying, unknown darkness? The prospect was terrifying, but the alternative, an eternity on this ghost bus, was infinitely worse. He stared at the man, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. He could only nod, a small, jerky movement. His throat was too constricted, too dry to form words, but his desperate agreement was clear. The man straightened up slightly, glancing quickly towards the front of the bus, then back at Nam, a flicker of something akin to grim resolve in his eyes. "Stay ready, don't hesitate, don't look back." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. He then moved just slightly ahead of Nam, positioning himself closer to the front door, his posture tense, coiled like a spring. Nam mirrored his readiness, clenching his fists, his body humming with a terrifying cocktail of adrenaline and fear. The bus continued its relentless, unsettling journey through the void.
Seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity. Nam's eyes were fixed on the man's back, then darted to the ominous double doors at the front. Every creak, every subtle shift in the bus's rhythm sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through him. The silent passengers, their heads still angled towards him, seemed to be waiting, watching, their lack of eyes somehow making their gaze even more intense, more suffocating. He tried to ignore them, to focus only on the man, on the doors, on the escape. He thought about his dorm, his textbooks, the warm cup of instant noodles he'd planned to make. The mundane, ordinary details of his life felt impossibly distant, like memories from another lifetime. He wanted to go back. He needed to go back. Then, a subtle shift. The low hum of the engine seemed to deepen, to strain. A faint, almost imperceptible lurch. The bus was slowing. Nam's heart leaped into his throat. This was it. The moment. The man stiffened.
Nam could feel the tension radiating from him. The speed of the bus decreased, not abruptly, but with a gradual heavy deceleration, as if struggling against an invisible force. It was still moving far too fast for a safe jump, but it was slowing. A low hiss, a mechanical groan, and the double doors began to part. Slowly at first, then widening with a sudden, startling whoosh. A blast of wind, icy and raw, slammed into the bus, carrying with it the scent of cold, sterile emptiness. It was a cold that bit to the bone, colder than anything Nam had ever felt, piercing through his jacket as if it were tissue paper. The sound of the wind was a mournful, hollow howl, like the lament of countless lost souls. Nhai! The man's voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the roaring wind, a guttural command that snapped Nam into action. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. His body moved on pure instinct, a desperate surge of adrenaline propelling him forward. He launched himself from his seat, following the man who had already sprung out, a dark silhouette against the terrifying void outside. They were jumping into nothingness, into the unknown, but it was the only choice, the only hope. Nam squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for impact, the icy wind tearing at his clothes, trying to pull him back into the bus, into the endless night. The impact was brutal. Nam hit the ground hard, the sudden jolt sending a searing pain through his shoulder and hip. He tumbled, rolling several times on what felt like rough, unyielding asphalt, the momentum of the bus still carrying him forward even after he had left its embrace. Sharp stones and grit tore at his clothes and skin, a painful symphony of scrapes and bruises. He gasped, a ragged, involuntary sound torn from his lungs, fighting to regain control of his flailing limbs. The frigid wind, no longer confined to the bus doors, enveloped him completely, a chilling presence that seemed to whisper forgotten secrets. He finally skidded to a stop, lying prone for một lúc một thở, utterly winded, his entire body a symphony of aches. His head throbbed, a dull ache behind his eyes. He coughed, spitting out dust via a faint, coppery taste of blood. His backpack, miraculously still clinging to his shoulders, had absorbed some of the impact, but he could feel the sting of raw skin through his torn jeans. The world spun for một lúc, a dizzying kaleidoscope of dark, blurry shapes against the oppressive blackness. Slowly, painfully, Nam pushed himself up onto his elbows, gasping for breath. The bus was still moving, its dim yellow lights receding into the dark, a spectral ship sailing further into the abyss. He looked around frantically, his eyes wide with desperate concern. Người đàn ông, he croaked, his voice hoarse and raw. The man, he had jumped first. He should be here, beside him, bruised but alive. But there was nothing. No other body sprawled on the ground, no struggling figure pushing themselves up. Only the vast, featureless stretch of a road that seemed to emerge from nowhere and disappear into nowhere, framed by the same impenetrable darkness that had been outside the bus windows. A profound, chilling realization began to dawn on Nam, a fresh wave of terror that eclipsed even the physical pain. Then, through the gloom, he saw him, the man. He wasn't on the ground. He was standing on the bottom step of the bus, half in, half out, his figure silhouetted against the receding interior light. He wasn't falling, wasn't struggling. He was simply standing there, perfectly still, watching Nam. Nam froze, his breath got in his throat. Confusion warred with a fresh, insidious horror. Why wasn't he jumping? Why was he still on the bus? A sickening pit formed in Nam's stomach. The man's face, bathed in the faint, sickly glow, was etched with an unbearable sadness, a profound regret. His eyes, once so vividly alive, now held a deep, melancholic resignation. They were filled with an unutterable sorrow, directed entirely at Nam. The bus, though still moving, seemed to slow just enough for the scene to play out in agonizing clarity. From within the dark confines of the bus, the driver's voice, raspy and devoid of warmth, cut through the wind's howl. Anh đã cứu quá nhiều người rồi, đã đến lúc lên lại xe. You have saved too many people. It's time to get back on the bus. The words hung heavy in the air, a final, chilling sentence. Nam watched helplessly as an impossible, horrifying transformation began to unfold before his very eyes. The man's face, which had been so uniquely human, so full of life, began to blur. His eyes, though steady, empathetic beacons, started to dim, to recede.
It was a subtle change at first, a loss of focus, a fading of the vibrant spark within them. Then, with more terrifying swiftness that made Nam gasp aloud, they hollowed out. The flesh around them seemed to melt away, leaving behind not eyes, not scars, but two deep, empty sockets, identical to all the other passengers. The man, now with the same chilling, vacant gaze as the rest of the spectral riders, offered Nam a small, faint smile. It was a smile of profound, heartbreaking understanding, a silent apology, a final farewell. His voice, once so resonant and clear, was now tinged with the same ethereal, almost whispery quality of
the other passenger who had warned Nam. Tôi từng là người sống giống như cậu. I was once a living person.
He pushed himself up again, slowly, painstakingly, his muscles screaming in protest. His hands, scraped and grimy, felt numb from the cold. He looked around, trying to discern anything, any landmark, any sign that he wasn't truly stranded in an endless purgatory. But there was nothing. No trees, no buildings, no distant glow of city lights. Only the flat, desolate stretch of asphalt, seemingly without beginning or end, under a sky that was a perfect, unblemished black. Even the rain had stopped, leaving only the biting wind. A profound sense of isolation washed over him, more intense than anything he had ever experienced. It was the isolation of being the sole living creature in a dead world. He stumbled forward, a few hesitant steps, then stopped. Where was he going? There was no direction, no destination.
He could walk for an eternity and still be nowhere. The thought was paralyzing. He reached into his backpack, driven by what primal need for anything familiar, anything that belonged to his old life. His fingers fumbled past textbooks, a half-eaten snack bar, and then brushed against something smooth and stiff. He pulled it out. It was a bus ticket. A bus ticket! He hadn't bought one when he boarded. Had he given it to him? Nam stared at the small, rectangular piece of paper, its edges crisp despite his fall. In the faint, ambient glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere in particular, he could make out the faded print. Tuyến không, vé dành cho người sống sót. Route 0, ticket for the survivor. His eyes widened. A ticket for the survivor. It wasn't a ticket to ride. It was a testament, a certification. He had escaped. The man had given him this, a final, silent message, a confirmation of his rescue, a symbol of his new, terrifying reality.
The weight of it in his hand felt immense, both a blessing and a curse. He was a survivor, yes, but what had he survived to? He looked around again, desperation mounting. He couldn't stay here. This wasn't the city. This wasn't even the world as he knew it. He had to find a way back. But the only way he knew was the bus, and that bus was gone. He walked a few more steps, his footsteps echoing eerily in the silence, each sound amplified by the sheer emptiness. He was shouting into a void, unheard, unseen. Then a faint shimmer, a distortion in the pervasive darkness, far in the distance, ahead of him. It was subtle, barely perceptible, like heat haze on a summer road, but this was no summer day. Hope, thin and fragile, flickered within him. Was it a mirage, a trick of his terrified mind, or a way back? He began to walk faster, ignoring the protests of his bruised body.
The ground beneath his feet was still the same rough asphalt, but it felt more solid, less ethereal than the void around him. The shimmering distortion grew, slowly resolving itself into something resembling a distant, hazy glow. Not the sickly yellow of the bus, but a faint, diffused light, like a city struggling to appear through a dense fog. As he walked, the landscape around him subtly began to change. The absolute blackness receded, replaced by shades of deep gray. The featureless road now had faint, almost invisible lines marking its edges. He could discern the faint outlines of what might be stunted, gnarled trees, like ancient, tortured sentinels guarding the path. The cold, while still intense, felt less bone-chilling, more akin to a winter night in the real world. He kept the ticket clutched in his hand, a tangible link to his ordeal, a grim reminder of what he had faced. The bus, the eyeless passengers, the man's sacrifice, it was all real, and he had survived. But the question remained, had he truly escaped or merely been deposited on the periphery of another, equally unsettling reality? The shimmering light ahead grew brighter, promising answers, or perhaps new horrors. He pushed forward, driven by a desperate need to understand, to return, to simply survive. The shimmering light in the distance solidified into a pale, anemic glow, pushing back the oppressive darkness. Nam, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation, hurried towards it, his bruised body protesting with every step. The ground, once so uniformly dark and desolate, gradually began to reveal faint markings, lines that suggested a road, and then, slowly, the faint, ghostly outlines of a median, sparse, brittle vegetation. It was still otherworldly, but less terrifyingly alien than the endless void he'd been abandoned in. As he drew closer, the light sharpened, coalescing into the indistinct, hazy aura of streetlights struggling through a thick, early morning fog. The air, though still frigid, lost some of its biting, supernatural cold, morphing into a familiar, damp chill that reminded him of a typical winter dawn in the city. He could almost smell the faint tang of exhaust fumes and damp concrete, a scent he never thought he'd long for. He pressed on, his eyes straining, desperate for any clear sign of his return. The amorphous shapes on either side of the road began to resolve into the blurred silhouettes of buildings, tall and narrow, their windows dark and unlit. They were still indistinct, like shapes seen through frosted glass, but they were buildings nonetheless, real buildings. His steps quickened, a desperate surge of adrenaline overriding the pain in his limbs. Finally, the fog began to thin, revealing more concrete details. The road beneath his feet was indeed asphalt, cracked and worn, but undeniably a city street. The buildings were old, dilapidated structures, perhaps abandoned warehouses or derelict factories, their brickwork crumbling, their windows broken. This wasn't the bustling heart of the city, but it was a periphery, a forgotten corner, and it was real. A small, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears, the distant, muted hum of traffic, a phantom echo of a city waking up. He stumbled forward, a wave of profound relief washing over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He had made it back. He had truly escaped. The bus ticket, still clutched tightly in his hand, felt like a burning coal, a tangible link to the horror he had just endured. He emerged from the thickest part of the fog bank onto a deserted street, lined with the decaying husks of industrial buildings. The streetlights here were few and far between, casting long, wavering shadows. The sky above was a bruised gray, promising the reluctant dawn.
He looked around frantically, trying to orient himself, to find anything familiar. This wasn't his usual route, not the path to his dorm. He was deep in the forgotten outer edge of the city, a district he rarely ventured into. He started walking again, his pace more confident, though his body still protested every movement. He needed to find a main road, a bus stop, anything that would lead him back to normalcy. He pulled out his phone, his thumb trembling as he tried to unlock it. No signal. Of course, the battery was also almost dead. He cursed under his breath, a wave of frustration adding to his fatigue. As he walked, a newspaper, damp and crumpled, lay half buried in a puddle near a rusted lamppost. On impulse, he bent down, hissing as his muscles protested, and picked it up. The date was today, or rather, the day that had just begun. The top headline, though blurred by moisture, caught his eye.
Mystery bus sighting on outer highway. No camera records. Nam's blood ran cold anew. His grip tightened on the paper. The article spoke of startled early morning commuters reporting a faded, old bus, its lights dim, seen hurtling down an rarely used stretch of highway at precisely 0:00. But traffic cameras along that very same stretch recorded nothing. No vehicle, no trace, just empty road. His eyes scanned the details, a chilling confirmation of his experience. The bus, the impossible bus, it existed not just as a nightmare, but as a fleeting spectral presence in the real world. The article dismissed it as mass hallucination, a trick of the light, but Nam knew better. He had ridden it, he had jumped from it, he held the survivor's ticket in his hand. He looked down at the ticket, then back at the article, a profound understanding settling over him. The bus was a bridge, a momentary tear between worlds, and he has stumbled through it.
The man, the eyeless passengers, they were all a part with this other reality, touching his own at that precise, unholy hour. The bus didn't just disappear into a void, it disappeared from existence, a transient apparition. A chilling thought flickered through his mind. What if the bus was still out there, lurking in the periphery of reality, waiting for another unsuspecting soul? The man's sacrifice, the desperate warning, the ticket, it was all a message. A warning not just for him, but for anyone who might encounter the Tuin Sebuit Khomza Khomkong. He was no longer just a student, he was a witness, a survivor carrying a terrible secret. He folded the ticket carefully, ducking it deep into his wallet, a hidden testament to an impossible journey. He then resumed walking, his destination clear, home. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would never truly be home again. The world had changed for him, the veil had been lifted, and he had seen what lay beyond. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the bus would continue its ghostly run, an eternal trap for the unwary, a silent sentinel between life and something far, far worse. He had to warn people, but how could he? Who would ever believe him? The gray dawn reluctantly painted the sky as Nam limped through the desolate industrial district, the newspaper clutched in his hand, feeling both real and utterly surreal. Each headline, each printed word was a confirmation of his harrowing ordeal, yet it was dismissed by the world as mere speculation, a glitch in collective perception. He was a ghost, walking among the living, carrying a truth too terrifying to articulate. The bus ticket, now safely tucked into his wallet, was a small, stiff piece of paper, yet it carried the weight of an entire alternate reality. His injuries began to throb with renewed intensity as the adrenaline of immediate survival faded. His left shoulder ached with the dull, persistent pain, and his hip felt bruised deep to the bone. Every step was a conscious effort, a testament to the brutal impact of his jump. But the physical discomfort was a distant hum compared to the profound psychological shift within him. The world he had known, with its predictable routines and comforting certainties, had been irrevocably altered. He had seen the seams of reality, and they were far thinner, far more porous than anyone imagined. He finally reached a more populated street, though it was still early and only a few stragglers were out. A delivery driver sipping coffee, a lone jogger, an elderly woman walking her dog. Their normalcy felt jarring, almost offensive in its obliviousness. He yearned to shout, to grab them and shake them, to warn them of the lurking danger that touched their world every midnight. But the words died in his throat. How could he? How could anyone believe a story of eyeless passengers and a sacrificing ghost?
They would think him mad, a victim of delirium or worse. He found a bus stop, a real one this time, with a proper schedule and a digital display, and slumped onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. The chill in the air bit at his exposed skin, but he barely registered it. His mind was a maelstrom of images, the warped city, the silent, staring sockets, the pleading ghost outside the window, the man's fading eyes and final, melancholic smile. Each memory was a sharp shard, cutting deeper into his psyche. As he sat there, trying to process the impossible, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He hadn't slept, not truly, in what felt like days. The mental and physical strain was immense. He leaned his head back against the cold metal of the bus stop, closing his eyes, seeking a brief respite, a moment of oblivion. But even with his eyes shut, the darkness behind them was not empty.
It was filled with a spectral glow of the Route Zero bus, its passengers turning their heads to stare at him. A shiver ran through him, deep and pervasive. He opened his eyes, forcing himself to confront the mundane reality of the city street, even its drabness a comfort compared to the void. He pulled out his phone again, desperate for any connection. Still no signal. The battery icon blinked critically low. He had to get to his dorm, recharge, try to make sense of things in a safe, familiar space. When a regular bus, bustling with a few early commuters, finally pulled up, Nam hesitated. The familiar rumble of its engine, the sight of actual human faces, should have been a relief. But a deep-seated fear had taken root. He eyed the bus with profound suspicion, a primal terror that made his palms sweat. Was this a trick? Would its destination sign suddenly change? Would the faces of the passengers hollow out?
His rationality screamed at him that it was absurd, but the terror was visceral. He knew what a normal bus looked like, but he also knew what a phantom one did. He forced himself to Bard, his movements stiff and wary. He paid his fare, his eyes sweeping over the driver, a tired but ordinary man. He found a seat near the front, positioning himself to see the destination sign clearly, to observe every passenger. He scrutinized their eyes, their breathing, their slight movements. He knew he looked paranoid, but he couldn't help small dorm room, a caged animal, feeling the inexorable march of time towards that cursed hour. He kept checking his phone, even though it still had no signal and was almost dead. The digital clock on his laptop glowed, counting down the minutes. Jaime Baza 30. At Jaime Baza 50, the exact time he had finished work the previous night, Nam felt a surge of cold dread so intense it buckled his knees. He sank onto his bed, trembling. He was safe, in his dorm, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of student life. But a primal fear whispered that distance didn't matter to the bus. Its existence defied logic, space, and time. He pulled himself together, driven by a new resolve. He had to be strong. He had survived. He had a warning. He looked at the bus ticket again, its simple inscription a call to action. He couldn't share his story, but he could share its implicit message. He had to try. He spent the next few hours drafting a post, carefully choosing his words, making it sound like a fictional ghost story, a warning disguised as entertainment. He described the desolate bus stop, the flickering light, the unusual destination sign, the driver, the eyeless passengers. He didn't include the part about the man's sacrifice. That was too personal, too raw. He finished it with a cryptic warning. Be careful at midnight, especially in the quiet parts of the city. Some rides are one way. He planned to post it anonymously online, perhaps on a forum dedicated to urban legends, where it might gain traction without him having to reveal himself. As he finished typing, the laptop screen flickered, the battery finally giving out. The room plunged into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow from the hallway. He looked at the clock on his phone, which had just enough power for one last glance. Hum hum. Silence. No strange hum, no distant yellow lights, no sudden chill. Just the usual creaks and murmurs of the dorm building. Nam held his breath, listening intently, every nerve ending screaming. He felt a profound sense of relief, so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. He was truly safe, for tonight at least. He looked down at his phone again, the screen now completely black. But as his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw something else. On his desk, nestled amongst his textbooks, was a small, crudely drawn sketch. He hadn't drawn it. He hadn't seen it before. It was a bus, an old, faded olive green bus, and on its destination sign, stark and clear, was doing hum. Below it, a line of text, written in một hand he didn't recognize, Chúng tôi sẽ đợi. We will wait. His breath hitched. The relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, insidious dread that seeped into his very bones. The bus knew. It had found him. It was a silent, chilling promise that his escape was not a finality, but merely a reprieve. The game was not over. It had just begun. The crudely drawn sketch, with its chilling message, Chúng tôi sẽ đợi, felt like a brand seared into Nam's soul. His heart, which had just begun to calm, now hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The relief he had felt, the fleeting belief in his safety, evaporated into a cold, crushing dread. The bus hadn't simply left him, it had found him, it had marked him. His dorm room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage with invisible bars, its walls too thin to keep out the creeping horror of the night.
Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and haunted. Images of eyeless faces, the man's fading gaze, and the infinite, swirling void outside the bus windows plagued his subconscious. He woke abruptly, covered in a cold sweat, his entire body tensed, listening for any phantom hum, any distant, sickly yellow glow. The morning light, usually a comforting presence, now felt harsh and unwelcome, doing little to dispel the profound gloom that had settled over him. He was a survivor, yes, but of a battle that continued to rage in the periphery of his existence. His life, once predictable and mundane, was irrevocably changed. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every late-night sound, every distant rumble of traffic sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He found himself avoiding dark alleys, deserted streets, and, most acutely, bus stops after nightfall. The once ordinary act of waiting for public transport now filled him with a visceral terror.
He often found himself glancing over his shoulder, a constant, gnawing paranoia taking root. He saw the world through a new, terrifying lens, aware of the thin, fragile veil separating his reality from another, far darker one. The bus ticket, vé dành cho người sống sót, became a sacred, yet terrifying relic. He kept it tucked deep in his wallet, a constant, physical reminder of his ordeal. It was proof for him, a tangible link to his truth. But to the world, it was just a piece of paper, utterly meaningless. This knowledge intensified his isolation. How could he warn anyone when his story would only be met with skepticism, pity, or ridicule? The burden of his secret was immense, a heavy cloak he wore constantly. The newspaper article, the one about the mystery bus sighting, faded quickly from the public consciousness. A few online discussions flared up, debating urban legends and mass hysteria, but they too died down, dismissed as internet fodder.
The world, in its comforting ignorance, chose to forget the anomaly. This public dismissal cemented Nam's profound solitude. He was a sentinel, carrying a terrible truth, but a sentinel to an oblivious world. He made a few attempts to subtly share his story, posting anonymous warnings on obscure forums. He crafted them as fictional tales, hoping the core message of caution might resonate with someone, anyone. "Beware the midnight bus," he wrote, "for some journeys are one-way tickets to the unseen." But his words were swallowed by the vastness of the internet, lost among countless other fantastical tales, never taken as the desperate plea for vigilance that they truly were. People commented on his creative writing, offering praise for his atmospheric prose, utterly missing the raw, terrifying truth embedded within his narrative. One night, several weeks after his escape, a normal bus, brightly lit and bustling with weary commuters, pulled up to a stop he was passing. The destination sign glowed with a familiar route number, but for a split second as the bus paused, its internal lights seemed to flicker, dipping into that sickly yellow hue. And for a terrifying moment, Nam swore he saw the faint outlines of the eyeless passengers within, their heads slowly turning. His heart seized, a wave of icy cold washing over him. He stumbled back, colliding with a lamppost, only to blink and find the bus perfectly normal again, its passengers laughing, its lights steady. It was just a trick of the light, he told himself, his mind playing tricks. But the fear was real, visceral, a chilling reminder that the bus was always lurking, just out of sight. He knew then that his escape wasn't an end to his ordeal, but merely a shift in its nature. The Twin Sebuit Khumza would continue its phantom journey every midnight, a silent, spectral hunter in the desolate outer edges of the city. It would find others, the lost, the desperate, the unsuspecting. And the man, his tragic rescuer, would continue his grim vigil, an eternal gatekeeper, forever trapped trance in a cycle of sacrifice. Nam carried the weight of that knowledge, an unspoken plea to the universe to be careful, to be aware.
His life was no longer truly his own. He was forever bound to the secret of the midnight bus, a silent guardian in a world that refused to see. He would live, he would study, he would age, but he would never forget. And every time the clock neared midnight, especially on a rainy, deserted night, a shiver would run down his spine, and he would glance out into the darkness, wondering who, tonight, might be standing at a dimly lit bus stop, seeing the impossible sign. Tuyến 0, giờ khởi hành, 0 giờ 00. He understood now, with a chilling certainty, that the greatest horror wasn't the bus itself, but the world's blissful ignorance, ensuring its eternal, silent hunt.